University, Varanasi, India. She received Fulbright Nehru Visiting Scholar Fellowship for the year 2013 to 2014 at the University of Virginia, USA. She was a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study at Shimla, India from 2018 to 2020. Her recent publications are Seizing Feminist, Gender, Violence and Performance, Reckless, and edited volume Gender, Space and Resistance, Women and Theatre in India in 2013, and Hero Worship, Fandom in Modern India in 2020. She has completed a meta research project sanctioned by the Indian Council of Social Science Research on staging gender performance, Women in Ramlila of Reckless. Dr. Singh has published interviews with India. Women performance in the Asian Theatre Journal contributed in 4 chapters in the Reckless Handbook of Asian Theatre, edited by Seon Liu in 2016, and was the guest editor for the special issue of the journal Gender Issues in 2018. She has also served as the conference chair for the Future of Women Conference held in Malaysia in 2018, Colombia, Sri Lanka in 2019, and Bangalore in 2020, and is the president of the Asian African Association for Women, Gender and Sexuality, AAAWZS. So she has so many feathers in her cap, so we shall be very fortunate if she just delivers a lecture that will benefit one and all. Thank you so much.
Just a minute, ma'am. Good morning, Anita.
Yeah, good morning, Saloni. How are you?
Just a minute. The students are requested to keep their mics on. Please put your audio and video switched off for the smooth function of the lecture, right? And please do not keep on writing messages. Good morning, Anita. Carry on, please.
Good. So I'll share my screen. Okay. So. I don't know why Google is not allowing to share the screen.
Problem, ma'am?
Yeah, I think it is not allowing me to share the screen. I don't know why.
Namita ma'am, can you speak to it, please?
Normally it allows you to share your screen, but here it for system preferences can't share your screen. I don't know why it says.
I think Namita ma'am needs to give you the permission to share it, Anita?
I think so. Yeah, I think is my screen being shared now?
Namita ma'am, you'll have to give permission to Anita ma'am to share her screen.
Yes.
All of you, please keep your audios and videos off. It would be easier for her.
The topic of guest lecture must be.
Please keep your audios and videos off.
So how to do it, Saloni madam? So I'm not allowing me to share my screen.
Since you are the admin ma'am, I cannot do it. You'll be able to do it only.
Yeah, you have
your audios and videos off. It would be better for her to do
wait. I think it's done. No, it says dismiss. No, I can see my, but it doesn't allow me to share it. It's not allowing me to share it.
Namita ma'am, please see in your settings.
Might not have.
Casey sir, please switch off your audio. It would be easier because the voice is echoing. Casey sir, Casey sir, ऑडियो ऑफ कर दीजिए प्रोफेसर केसी और ऑडियो ऑफ कर दीजिए सर Are you able to do it right now, ma'am?
No.
Okay, let Namita ma'am find it out, ma'am.
I mean, it has never happened.
Your voice is because it's very easy to do the screen sharing over here.
I know. I mean, it has never happened like this.
Let me check. Namita ma'am is looking into it, ma'am. Wait for a few seconds.
This is happening with me. Can I rejoin once more?
Yes, do so.
I think so. I'll do that.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, I'll just take 1 minute. I don't know. This has never happened. I use Google Meet for my classroom.
Yes,
so I'll come back
we
again.
also do it.
No, your voice is coming. Madam, your voice.
Ma'am, her voice is coming, but she's not able to share her screen. That's the problem. Anita ma'am, you have muted yourself. Please unmute yourself.
Okay. Now my screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible now.
Okay, I think I'll go with this then. Okay, there's some issue with the desktop, but let it be. I think I'll use this. Okay. So you can see the topic. Thank you all for inviting me here. So you can see the topic of my presentation is gender, literature, and intersectionality. So basically, what I'm planning to do with you today is to look at how literature has been a very powerful medium of, one would say, activism, of raising consciousness, of unsettling certain assumed issues in society, and how, as a society, we have progressed through political intervention, social changes, cultural practices, as well as literature. So we've all acknowledged the power of literature, right down from Plato. Plato said that literature is very harmful. It excites people. Aristotle corrected Plato and said that literature has the power to, is greater than philosophy. Has an imaginative power and a creative power and so on. And then from Matthew Arnold and so on, we saw how people, discuss literature as maybe an art for art's sake or maybe art for, improving the society and so on. So with the oncoming of the feminist movement worldwide, the political changes, the right to vote that were in demand, literature also incorporated these issues. Literature also incorporated these debates. Now you see a quotation here: literature reinforces or undermines economic, political, social oppression of women. So literature basically, as I said, engages with social, cultural issues in a large way. And as I said, we know the power of literature also because of certain books that have been banned. So books have potential of unsettling our assumed, stereotypes in society and so on. So the next slide is, uh, it says feminist critique or text treatment of women. So now here in this particular slide, I'll be looking at some text and how they have treated women. Women have always been a part of literature, down to Sophocles, to any ancient writers, or if you look at the Indian scenario, Abhigyan Shakuntalam, and so on. Women have always, participated or been a part of whatever the treatment of the, social situation was. So I only take three important texts, and these, the two, one is from American literature. So the first one I take up very briefly. So I'll take up several texts to show how these texts have engaged with gender issues. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, those who have read this text, it's an American, very important American text written in 1885. It's a text, as the title suggests, it talks about the adventures of a boy called Huckleberry Finn, and he is accompanied by another slave called Jim, and they go on River Mississippi in a boat, and they have several adventures as they go in, as they stop at different islands and so on. So this book is basically the adventures of this boy called Huckleberry Finn. Now Huckleberry Finn is an orphan, and he's been adopted by two women called Widow Douglas and Miss Watson. Now, as I said, the portrayal of the men and the women in this narrative is, the men are adventurous, masculine, virile, out in the open, they inhabit open spaces, whereas the two women, uh, that is Widow Douglas and Miss Watson, are portrayed as prim, proper, sustaining the morality of society, religious, and their intent is to civilize Huckleberry Finn. So we see very clear binaries being created in this narrative of what the men behave like and what the women are like. They are very particular about cleanliness, they're very particular about religious sermons and so on. So we see already that this text creates a binary between what men and women are. Second text, again a very popular text that you may have read, is Thomas Hardy's Mayor of Casterbridge. Now, Mayor of Casterbridge is written somewhere in the late Victorian period, and the text begins with Henshard selling off his wife. He literally sells off his wife for the price of, for the price of 5 shillings and 5 guineas or something, 5 shillings and 5 guineas to a person. So apparently, this selling off was something that was not very uncommon during the time of Hardy. So, the text, as I said, begins with a kind of a misogynistic note of the wife as a commodity to be sold off to the first buyer. Although Henshard is shown as to be drunk, but then he does sell off. The act of selling a wife does happen in the beginning of the play. The third novel that I take up is For Whom the Bells Toll by Ernest Hemingway. Here there is a character called Robert Jordan. He's a young American. Uh, he's a dynamiter, and he's there to blow up a bridge. So again, you see the central character is this Jordan is a virile, masculine man. He participates in the Civil War against in the Spanish Civil War. So he represents all that is masculine and strong and effective. Whereas the woman that we find in this play, Maria, she's very stereotypical, and she is almost an embodiment of the male fantasy. She's pretty, she's soft, she's sympathetic, and so on. She's been described as land. She's described as land, static, and so on. She is not, whereas the man is active force. So we have again, as I said, two binaries being created: man as a an active force, women as a static force. So again, in Hart, so all these three narratives, as I have given an example, all these narratives portray man as active force, women as static force. Now, on this side of the screen, you can see, so this treatment of the text, the misogyny of the text, was questioned by writers, in the 20th century. And you can see first text, Mary Daly's Beyond God the Father. So Mary Daly, she questioned the religion. She said these religious texts that we have, the epics. So she says that we cannot really simply bring on reforms and change it and believe that society can change. We need to look into the superstructures. We need to look into the hardcore beliefs that have settled in our society to change that and then probably the status of women or women's, we can talk about women's equality and so on. So she says that we need to look at the religious texts, the epics, the legends, the stories. We need to revise them, and we know that there has been a large-scale revision of stories from Mahabharata and Ramayana. A lot of retelling of Sita has happened. I'm sure you all know a lot of ways in which writers have engaged with Draupadi, with Kunti, with Sita, and so on and so forth. There is also a play on Mandodari. Mandodari was the wife of Ravana, but we don't know much about Mandodari. So there is a text that speaks from the perspective of Mandodari and how she reacts to a husband who has abducted a woman and brought her to his garden and so on. The other important text is Yuganta, the end of an epoch. It's a book written by Iravate Karve. So what she does, she looks at the stories of Mahabharata, the several stories of Mahabharata, and the women characters, and she analyzes these women characters, their silences, and she gives a very important socio-political context of these stories. So again, Yuganta is also a book that challenges the epic, just as Mary Daly has challenged the religious texts and says that we need to create a new religion. We need to create a new religion which is more egalitarian towards women. Now, another effort, so one effort that was done by feminist writers and feminist theorists was to look at into the canonical literature that I did in the previous slide. The canonical literature, the absence of women in canonical literature, the space that the canonical literature gave to the women, the portrayal of women in canonical literature. So that was a feminist critique of canonical literature. The second effort that was carried on by these women writers was to look at the lost advances of women writing. So there is a belief that women have always been writing, but their writings have not been acknowledged and not been published, so to say, or not been read, because they were not supposed to be writing. They were not supposed to be writers. Women would produce and men would write. Men were writers and women were producers. Men were producers and women were reproducers. So men occupied the public domain, women were in the private domain of the production, men were in the public domain of production, and so on. So you can see this quote by Virginia Woolf, which says, for most of the history, anonymous was a woman. So you very often come across a story or a quotation which says anonymous. So anonymous, Virginia Woolf says, probably was a woman. And because this person needed to hide her identity, because as a woman she could not be writing. And if you remember the early writers that we had, George Eliot and so many other female writers who adopted a pseudonym while writing, because Mary Ann Evans was George Eliot, I suppose. So they all had pseudonym, male names or gender neutral names, so that they could get into the publishing, or they could get into the world which was a largely a male dominated world. So as I said, the other effort of the feminist theorist was to retrieve the lost Atlantis of women writing. So were there women writers previously? Probably they were not acknowledged. So one very important book from the Indian context is women writing in India 600 BC to the present. Like if you ask yourself who are the important women writers in India, prior to the independence, you will hardly think of any, or very few names come to you with a lot of struggle. So Suzy Tharu and K. Lalita have done a lot of archival work, and they have brought all these women writers who have been writing from 600 BCs, that is the Therigatha, the Buddhist monks, the Sufi writers, and so on. There's so many writers who have been writing, their writings have not been published or they have not received wide circulation. So all these writings you can find in women writing from 600 BC to the present. It's a very interesting anthology. Second small example I give you is the actress Vinodni Dasi from Bengal. She wrote while she was living. You can see her age is 18. Her time span is 1863 to 1941. That is pre-independence. Of course, then women were not supposed to be actresses on stage or writers. So the spaces were very equally divided. The binaries. The man for the field, as Tennyson says in Princes. Man for the field, women for the herd. Man to command, women to obey, and all else is confusion. So this was a time where we also believed that man for the field and women for the herd. So these, as I said, these spaces were very clearly demarcated. So Binodni Dasi then, she was a very important theatre actress, and she earned a lot of money also. And they were planning to build up a theatre stage in Kolkata. That was so when they were building, and Binodni contributed a lot of money. And they said when she donated a lot of money for this construction, they said that when this theatre house is built, we will call it B Theatre in your name, in Binodni Dasi's name. But when the theatre actually got complete and it was built and the inauguration was to happen, Vinodni saw that the theatre was named not B Theatre but Star Theatre. Star Theatre still exists in Kolkata. So disappointed by this vision that her fellow mates did with her, she gave up her acting career. Nevertheless, she wrote two autobiographies, Amar Kotha and Amar Abhinetri Jeevan. Now, this was translated a couple of years back by W. Bhattacharya into English, and she got this from the archive. So, her story also demonstrates that a woman cannot write. So, when she wrote her autobiography with her own, she got it published with her own money in Kolkata, in a street. All the copies of her book were piled up, and they were burned by people in protest because a woman cannot be writing. So I just gave an example to show that this was a fate of women who were bold enough to write and publish books on their own. Excuse me. So here I have some other text from the Western context. Linda Nochlin, she is basically an artist, and she says, why have there been no great women artists? So we know Renaissance, we have so many, powerful Leonardo da Vinci, Picasso, and you name it. So we have these writers, we have these artists so prominently displayed, and we speak about them in large numbers. But she says, why was that in Renaissance there were no great women artists? Weren't they their artists? They may have been, but somehow they have not been in the forefront. If you remember, Virginia Woolf has written a book called A Room of One's Own, where she says that Shakespeare, we all know how popular Shakespeare is, we all do Shakespeare as literature students, we still study Shakespeare and we still believe that he is so relevant to us. Even Bollywood believes that Shakespeare is very relevant to us. And a lot of remake of Shakespeare movies have happened. Now, Virginia Woolf says that Shakespeare was so creative. Shakespeare may have, so she imagines a sister of Shakespeare, and she says that Shakespeare may have had a sister. And what about the sister? Can anybody say what the name of Shakespeare's sister was? Judith. She imagines a name, Judith Shakespeare. And she says, what happened to her? Judith Shakespeare would also go to the theatre houses. She must also have been as creative as Shakespeare was. But she was never allowed to write. And then, like Shakespeare, we know how he used to go, he used to take, he was in charge of the stable. And then sometimes when the actors were missing, he would played a role, and then gradually he got to know the art of performance, and then he started writing play. But what about Judith Shakespeare? She would go to see the play like Shakespeare, but then she fell into an affair with one of the young small actors, and then she was pregnant, and then probably she became a housewife, and she was lost in oblivion. So this is the imaginary history of Judith Shakespeare, a counterpart of Shakespeare. So Linda Notchin also talks about that why are these women artists not visible in Renaissance period. Dale Spender's work she calls her work as mothers of novel. 100 good women novelists before Jane Austen. So when we think of, women writers or women novelists in British literature, the first name that comes to us is Jane Austen. And before that, probably we believe that there are no, there were no writers before Jane Austen. We go down to our history of British literature goes back to Chaucer and so on. That is what is prescribed for us. But it is way down in the to Jane Austen that we are doing. So Dale Spender unearths or finds in archives the 100 good women novelists before Jane Austen. So she says that Jane Austen was not the first one to be writing a novel, but there were 100 other women writers who probably fell into oblivion because of the social norms, the norm that prohibited women to become a writer and the norm that encouraged man to be a writer. Showalter similarly, like Susie Tharu and K. Lalita, she brought out a book, a literature of her own and towards the feminist poetics, and she says that there were phases of women writing. Women were not supposed to be writers. Then there was a feminine phase, a feminist phase, and then a female phase, and so on. So she also, in her work from Bronte to Lessing, she also tries to bring the writers to the forefront. Now, the other important aspect that we do in literature is gynocriticism. So what we have done so far is the text treatment of the canonical text and the treatment of women, the majorly canonical male writers and how they have described women in the text. Secondly, we have done women who have the lost Atlantis of women writers and how they have been pushed into oblivion.
Yes.
Now the third part that I'm going to do is, I think somebody's mic is switched on. Can you please switch off your mic? Can you please switch off your mic? Yeah, thank you. So the third is gynocriticism. Gynocriticism means how are women writing? What is this in the women writing that is different? Do women write differently than men? Probably no. Ellen Showalter in her essay, Feminist Criticism in Wilderness, analyzes this, that two women, very often we have a tendency of making a comparison between men and women. We say when women speak in a particular way, men speak in a particular way, men write in a particular way. Very often students ask me that women write in a particular way and men write in a particular way. That's not really true. It is culture that makes us write in a particular way, and given the same socio-economic cultural background and access to the public space, there is no real difference between the way men and women write. Because women are mostly, as I said before, 20th century women inhabited the familial spaces, the inner spaces. Hence, their language was more, one would say, more, full of endearments, more full of feelings, sympathy, empathy, and so on. Men inhabited the public space, hence their language was more rational, more direct, and more concise, and so on. So it is, as I said, the spaces that make men and women write the way they do, and not, genetically they are programmed to write in a particular way. Now, a lot of writings have been done on why and how women write. So, a very important book by Sandra Gilbert and Susan Hubert is The Mad Women in the Attic, Women Writer in 19th Century Literary Imagination. Now, women have been writing. So, the earliest, as we said, the earliest popularly that we know that they were writing in 19th century. Now, she takes up, Gilbert and Hubert take up Bronte's work, Jane Eyre. And
And if you know the story of Jane Eyre was a governess, and she goes to work in the house of Mr. Rochester, and gradually they fall in love, and she realizes that there is a woman locked up in the attic, and she's a mad woman, and she is so animalistic. She hardly speaks. She only screams and screeches and so on. So Gilbert and Huber analyze this situation and they say that this is basically a women writer's double. Women writer is supposed to be writing pious, chaste narratives of their empowerment, and narratives in which they are portrayed as very understanding, and that is what Jane Eyre is portrayed in the novel. She's a very strong woman, but she never compromises with her dignity, and that is how she wins the love of Mr. Rochester. But there is a dark double of Jane Eyre also, and this is depicted in the figure of in the trope of this mad woman in the novel. So this is how that they try to say that women writers were writing, but they were suppressing their real selves. Again, I will quote Virginia Woolf. She says, "If women wrote what they felt," she writes in A Room of One's Own, "men would have been shocked, because women have imagination, women have feelings, they have their own sexuality, but they try to suppress that and write what is expected of them, what society normatively accepts a women writer to be doing." So this is what Virginia Gilbert and Huber, express in their work. Ellen Moore, also in Literary Women, talks about these suppressed, or they use a term palimpsest. Palimpsest, that there are words on the page, and there are other words that are suppressed. We know now a lot of lesbian and gay literature have become popular. So what these lesbian and gay writers are doing, that they are unearthing the other older writings and showing how these writers who were gay writers, how they had to suppress their sexuality, but nevertheless they expressed it through this invisible writing, what you call the palimpsest. There is a particular narrative, but when you read the narrative and the fault lines of the narrative, you will be able to understand that this is basically a lesbian writer or a gay writer who is expressing his sexuality. Similarly, Ellen Moore also said that their writings had a palimpsest. Their writing had a layer that was underneath, and this underneath layer showed how they expressed their oppression, their deprivation, and so on, and the difficulty that they faced as writers. Showalter, as I have already quoted in literature of their own British women novelists from Broadly to Lessing, she gives us a detail of these writers from this. Alice Walker, she is a black African American woman, and she also says that there is this anxiety of they're not having a proper forefathers or foremothers. So it is important for women to have a tradition of women writing. So we don't have a tradition of women writing. So when these writers were writing, they were looking for a tradition of women writing. It's a role model that they could look up to. So the way that these women are writing. So these gynocriticism basically was searching for a tradition of women writing, as well as saying that women writing or writers always had a double meaning or a fault line in the text. Now, a post-colonial writer, Gayatri Spivak, in her work Three Women Texts and Critique of Imperialism, says that these three texts, she quotes three texts, and the text one is Jane Eyre, the other is Wild Sargasso Sea, and the third is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Now, if anybody has read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, it is about a scientist and who discovers a monster in the lab. So it's about the birthing. It is about the anxiety, because Mary Shelley, when she was writing the narrative, she had lost her first child. She lost her first child in childbirth. So this anxiety of birthing, the relationship of parent and the child, is what is actually the underneath of the whole story of Frankenstein. Okay. So now with this, I think we have around 5 to 10 minutes more. I'll very you have to unmute yourself. Yeah, can I take 5 more minutes or you want to discuss? You are muted. You are still muted.
So the meeting.
please unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Yes, I have unmuted it. The meeting will go on till 11:40.
Okay. So
you can just continue.
5 more minutes. I'll just take 5-10 more minutes. Okay. So now I'll give you some examples. So I used the term intersectionality earlier. So up till now I've been talking about women. Of course, I brought in black Afro-American women also. Now I'll give you some example from Indian context. So these are women, but they are not. Women is not a homogeneous category, and we cannot talk about women as I said as a homogeneous category. There is always an intersection of gender, caste, sexual orientation, location, ability, age, and so on. I mean, all women cannot be clubbed in a category. In fact, there is a work which says, is there a woman? I mean, is there something as a woman? Because there are we are all determined by our caste, class, sexual orientation, and location, and so on. So I've taken three texts that are very different from each other, and nevertheless they bring out their own issues which are considered to be very marginal. We may not have heard their voices before, but what is now that this, as I said, how literature engages with issues of marginality. Literature is now engaged with issues of social correction and so on. So three texts, as I said. The first text is Nalini Jamila's autobiography of a sex worker. You can very clearly see that she is a prostitute and she is writing her own autobiography. The second is Lakshmi Narayan Tripathi. She's a more popular writer. You may have heard of her. Red Lipstick, Men in My Life. And lastly, again, a popular writer, Baby Kamble, The Prison We Broke. She's a Dalit woman writer. So we have a prostitute, we have a lesbian writer, and we have a Dalit writer. So you see their experiences as women or as gender, as cross gender, they are very different, and it is literature that helps them to bring their experiences to the forefront. So the first text that I take up is Nalini Jamila's autobiography of a sex worker. So very clearly, Nalini Jamila was, into the sex work, and she narrates her experiences of being a sex worker, and she very clearly says that this is a work that she does. And then she questions, through her autobiography, becomes a vehicle to question society about her work. Why is that, she questions, that a woman who is a sex worker is not respected, whereas a man who is a client is respected. So you can see this quotation: men who are our clients stand against us like they are reincarnations of Maryada Ram and paint us as sinners. We are not doing anything that harms society. It is labor like any other, and so why is it wrong to acknowledge that openly? So she says that, so you can see that this sums up what she is trying to do in her work. Through her autobiography, through a retelling of the experiences that she has in life, she says that I chose this as a profession. Now she goes on to justify why she chose this, sex work. She says initially she was working in some factory, and she says even in that factory she had to please the owner of the factory by sexual, work that she had to do for him. So if she says, if I have to work in a factory and please my owner with my by providing him sexual favors and then working all day in the factory, why not take it up as a work? So she justifies her work, and then at the end, now she is of course a very important voice, and she runs her own NGO. She goes and delivers lecture world over and so on, and you can see that she has written a work. She also studied, and then she says that what is the need of the society is that sex work can be considered to be a work and not stigmatized by the society, so that they are free to carry on their work. If sex work is not stigmatized, then these prostitutes would be free to work without the stain and the taint of uh, doing something immoral and so on. So we know that a lot of debate is going on about prostitution in the pro work, or prostitution as work, or prostitution as sex work, and so on. The second work that I take up is Lakshmi Narayan Tripathi, Me Hijra Me Lakshmi, and she has written two autobiographies, Me Hijra Me Lakshmi and Red Lipsticks. Both are about her experiences with men, and through her work. And she says, you can see certain quotations, when we were kids, I was vilified very often because I was different. So, Annie Foster Sterling, in her book Sexing the Body, says that there are not just man and women, there are not just two sex bodies, there are several sex bodies. There are five major categories of differently sexed bodies. So, but as a society, we recognize man and women. So, this is also her contention. This is also Lakshmi Narayan Tripathi's contention, that neither I was a boy nor a girl, and hence I was treated differently by my friends because I did not subscribe to the notion of what it means to be a woman, what is femininity, and what is man, and what it means to be masculine. So Butler also, if you Butler's work Gender Performativity, where she says that we are born with a certain anatomy, and we are labeled man and women, and then we are supposed to be masculine or feminine, and we are supposed to be, if we are feminine to women, we are feminine, we are married to a man, we can only get married to a man. So if we are born man, and we have to have masculine attributes, we cannot behave in a feminine way. If we behave, being a man, if we behave in a feminine way, society also cast aspersions on us, and then we have to marry a woman. We cannot. So she says this is the mold of the society, a caste of the society that needs to break. As I said, Anne Foster Sterling, in her book Sexing the Body, says that there are as many as five different bodies. Why is it that we have not recognized it? So we know very recently, in I think 2013, Supreme Court recognized the third gender as being as something valid and recognized by the law. So, so she says that my problem was that I was feminine despite being a boy. So she was a boy, but she was feminine. So as I said, different bodies, different action, and different sexuality. So we have still not accepted that, our law does not still accept the same-sex marriage and so on. So basically, in her autobiography, she demonstrates that gender is a performance. Gender is not a pre-given. It is not natural that if we are born with a specific body, that we behave in a specific way, and we choose sexuality specifically. Sexuality is also a matter of preference. It is a matter of choice, and so on. So, but then her narrative ends with, and she says, "I'm a celebration. I feel, and that is the narrative I choose for myself." So through this narrative, as I said, the power of narrative is to assert your identity, is to say that this is what you are, and I celebrate the difference in my body that I have. So that narrative enables her to speak her identity. That is what, as I said, a narrative enables her. Baby Kamle's Prison We Broke is about the experiences of a Dalit woman, and then she says that despite being a Dalit woman, it was Baba Sahib Ambedkar's teachings that she followed, and then she goes on to say that the Dalit women were always treated differently. So she talks about the double marginalization, the Dalit women in their own community, in the Dalit community, and in the larger community. So that is what she tries to portray. So we have a couple of more minutes. I will just conclude this so that we get some more time to discuss. So all these voices that I took up, the four autobiographical voices that I took up, they're very individual voices. Our literature has individual voices, but they're largely experiences of diverse construction of gendered bodies across class, classes, region, religion, and other categories. So I've given you a vast spectrum of experiences that range from Western literature to Indian literature, people belonging to different caste, community, ethnicity, and different religion categories, sexuality. So to come back to where I started is, literature enables us to hold our experiences, to convey our experiences, and it says that those who tell their stories become powerful. very powerful means of constructing your identity, of asserting your identity. So I'll not read up the whole thing. You can read it up. And with this, I will end so that we can have some. It is 32. I think we have 8 more minutes. We can have some discussion if you want. So can I stop sharing this?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So the thanks, yes, yeah. Now the thanks giving will be given by Dr. Chandradeep sir, who is the head of the Department of English in Commerce College. So he will have his words. Sir, please share.
Nobody, students do not want to question anything. We have no question.
So since madam is preferring the questions first, so students need to ask their questions, put their questions if you have any. Yes, students, if you have anything to ask from Anita madam, our honored guest, you are free to just put your questions.
Excuse me, ma'am. Can I ask a question?
Yes, sure.
Yes, yes.
Good morning, ma'am. It was a wonderful lecture. It was a pleasure to listen to you. And I have just a question that you mentioned that women authors for a long time faced the anxiety of influence as well as the anxiety of authorship. So how did they actually overcome that?
Yeah. Anxiety of influence. Harold Bloom has a work that he calls it anxiety of influence, where he says that the older writers, the male canonical writers, had an anxiety of influence because so many writers, like if you're a poet, so many big poets have come, but for women writers there was no ancestry, so to say. There were no mothers, so they had an anxiety of allegiance. So that is why, as I said, the unearthing of the lost Atlantis of women writing. So we have had a women writing. So they were creating a women. As I said, as you said, that how did they overcome? So by the two ways, by unearthing the lost Atlantis of women writing, by creating their own aesthetics, by writing the body, as Helen Sixu says, write your body. So there are a lot of feminist writers who were pointing out to how women should be writing. She says, write your body, because women have been excluded from their body. Kamala Das, you have read. So how Kamala Das writes her body. She was heavily censored while she was writing. But nevertheless, so one dictum that women writers followed is insert, write your body, talk about yourself, talk about your needs, as men have always been doing. So they've created their own creed, as well as they have found a whole genre of writing of the women writers.
Yes, and anybody else wants to have a question?
Ma'am, can I ask a question?
Yes, why not?
Ma'am, you mentioned Iravati Karve's Yuganta, and I had read an essay on Draupadi. There's an essay on Draupadi on that, and I was wondering that if you're taking mythological characters, like aren't we taking Sita and Draupadi as these staple, stereotypical characters for criticism, and why are we not looking into other mythological characters, like just say like from Silapathikaram, which is a Tamil epic, and there's the character Kannaki, Kannaki, and Kannaki and Madhavi, and why are we not looking at these characters and looking at it from a feminist viewpoint? I think so that will be a more interesting.
So, Shubhamay, a lot of work has also been done on Kannaki. Kannaki who cuts off her breast and in anger she throws it away and so on. A lot of work has been done on Kannaki in Tamil. So I don't know about the reworking, but a lot of work has already been done on Kannaki. And even Mahabharata and Ramayana, a lot of reworking, as I said. I will here point out a very interesting play. You must read it, Madhavi by Bhishma Sahani. So when we say it's a feminist writer, not necessarily that writer has to be a woman writer. Madhavi by Bhishma Sahani is a very beautiful play. It's a very small incident of Madhavi, who's married to Galav, and how he trades her for getting horses. So Galav was a disciple of Vishwamitra, and Vishwamitra told him to get 800 white horses. So he sells his wife to 3 different kings to get those horses. So so now you see that lot of reworking of these injustice has been meted out. Kannagi is the wife, and Madhuri is the dancing girl, probably the prostitute or the.
And Kannagi's apostasis to
Yeah.
Patni as the goddess also, that's there also.
So she herself is a very powerful character.
Yes. More questions or no questions?
Uh,
Yes.
may I start? Professor Namita Singh, madam?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Kristen.
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
Because
Yes.
first of all, I'd like to congratulate the distinguished scholar of English literature and a renowned author, Dr. Anita Singh, who is also a professor of English at Banaras Hindu University. And it was really a mesmerizing experience, and we all have been immensely benefited by your thought-provoking lecture. Highly, it was well documented. It is my hobby to write down the things, and I have noted down because I have to propose a vote of thanks. And we are having so many distinguished scholars amongst us. Professor Namita Singh, madam, is the first one who is our respected head of the department, PG head of the department, and Dean Faculty of Humanities, Patna University, who has taken this initiative to organize a guest lecture in a short notice. And about more than 60 students, PhD course students and teachers are participating, and we have listening you with rapt attention. And Dr. Saloni Kumarji is also amongst us, senior professor of English and ex-HOD, Department of English, College of Commerce. And Dr. Professor Yasodhara Madam is also on the screen. I would like to congratulate her for being with us on this August occasion. And then after Dr. Rajendra Singh sir is also here, distinguished teacher, senior faculty of our college. He is amongst us. And Dr. Aditi is also here, very sincere and very popular teacher of Patusa University. And other teachers are also might be there, but I could see their face. I am also only putting their names. And then after, we are having about 52 research scholars, 52, 53 research scholars, or you mean to say that they are bound to become PhD degree holders. They are completing their PhD coursework under the stewardship and guidance of Professor Namita Singh Madam. And before saying formal rituals, I would like to emphasize the points which Professor Anita Singh Madam has just in her about 45 minutes long speech. She has thrown light on various aspects. It was really a wonderful experience. Gender, literature, and intersectionality. This is the topic of today's lecture. And she has, right from the beginning, she quoted from Gita, Ramayana also. She has quoted Kunti, Draupadi, and Sita from Mahabharata, the epic. And from the Ramayana, she has also quoted Sita, and then Mandodari. And also there are other characters, Hidimba, she is the unsung heroine of that very thing, epic. And there are other, Urvashi is also there. Her sacrifice is greater than Sita. It is my observation. Because she could not live with her husband all through the years of Banvas, and she remained there in a secluded state, and due to the absence of her husband Lakshman. And then after you have quoted several authors and legendary philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, then after Matthew Arnold also Art for Art's sake, and then you gave you have thrown full light on feminist movement and political changes which took place across the globe. Then after also you have displayed the things through feminist, through your slide, feminist critique, and then you also quoted the lines and the things from Abhigyan Shakuntalam. And then you focused on three books and on medical literature, Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, then Thomas Hardy's The Mayor of Kesterbridge, and for whom the bell tolls, Ernest Hemingway. You have emphasized in detail on these three books and masterpieces. Then after you have also emphasized on this point that men as an active force and women as a static force. You have highlighted this aspect also. Then you quoted vigorously and exhaustively women writers, especially Jane Austen, George Eliot, Virginia Woolf. You quoted their characters and their writings in your speech, in your thought-provoking speech. Then you have also quoted and highlighted gynocriticism in your lecture and narratives of women empowerment as well. It was really, madam, like a delightful experience to hear you, and we'd like to invite you and face to face we in our seminar and national seminar which we will be organizing jointly with Professor Namita Singh madam. And you have also highlighted the recent topic gay writers and gay writing in your in that context with Alice Walker's in search for our mother's garden. And then after you also highlighted from Indian point of view, gender, caste, class, sexual orientation in Indian context, and issues of marginality and social corrections also you had highlighted, and especially you had given ample hint on the things which have been written in the autobiography of a sex worker by Nalini Jamila, and what type of pains, sufferings, and agony they used to go through. You have highlighted in your lecture. Then Red Lipstick by Lakshmi Narayan Tripathi ji also. And you have highlighted this point that sexuality is also a matter of preference, a matter of choice. You have focused on this aspect also, and the narrative of search for identity has been highlighted by you in your lecture. Then after you also dealt with Dalit women's pains and suffering, that they used to suffer from double marginalization, being a Dalit and being a woman. You have also, and Dr. Ambedkar was also quoted by you. And then after, I would also like to thank my dear students, Maitri, who had asked a relevant question to you, and you have satisfactorily and very wisely satisfied her point of first. Then after, Sumay also highlighted about the mythological characters, and he also raised some Tamil characters which are to be dealt with, and you have had such a command that you gave ample reply and satisfactory reply to his queries and to his doubts. And I, on behalf of PG Department of English, Patna University, on behalf of College of Commerce, Arts and Science, Department of English, extend my heartfelt gratitude to you, Professor Anita Singh Madam, and to Professor Namita Singh Madam, to all my faculty members and students for making this program a grand success, a historic one. Thank you all, and we would like to see you again with some other topic.
Sir, just a minute. So we will miss a very great thing if we miss one name, Yashodhara Madam.
Yashodhara, I can see her. She is my very dear friend.
Oh, she told me.
Yeah.
In the bridge between me and Anita Madam. So it would not have been possible if she would not have just linked the bridge, that we are just having such a great lecture and great knowledge. So as Jamaldeep sir told, touched all the aspects, we will just like to see you more and more in future also, giving you lot of thanks from all of us.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Yes.
Bye bye. Bye, Yashoda.